Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Megan Glova. It was a tragic school shooting in Georgia this week that killed 4 people, 2 students and 2 teachers. It really gets you thinking, right? How do schools in our area keep students safe? Joining us now to provide some insight is WRAL's Eastern North Carolina reporter Heidi Kirk. Hi, Heidi.
Hey, Megan. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So many schools in Wake, Durham, and Nash counties utilize what's called school resource officers. So can you explain what Nash County Public Schools is currently going through with its SROs?
Absolutely. And first of all, I want to start with my process here because I think that's a little bit helpful to understand how the story came into our purview. So I got a call literally yesterday from a Nash County school board member. His name is Dean Edwards, and he said he thought he had a story for me. And he said he had learned at the last school board meeting that the SRO agreement, otherwise known as the Memorandum of Understanding, which I realize is a little bit clunky, but that's what they call it. But he said he realized that it had expired. It actually came up in a safety briefing by the assistant superintendent with the Nash County School District a couple of weeks ago. And he thought, expired? How could that be? These are really important rules within the school system. So he was like, I'm a little bit concerned. And when he called us, he's basically explaining all of this. And so we looked into it a little bit. Now, the Nash County Public Schools SRO agreement is a partnership with the Nash County Sheriff's Office and the Rocky Mount Police Department. So this year, it expired at the end of June. And typically, every single year, they're reviewing this agreement. So basically looking into it, figuring out if they want to change anything, if they want to keep it the same. And if they want to keep it the same, it seems like a pretty simple process. Not much happens. They just kind of give it a stamp of approval and it goes into the next year. But this time, new terms were proposed. And right now, it's currently awaiting signatures from both parties. They had to look back into it. And it's a little bit more of a clunky process. Now, it's important to note here, there was no impact to the actual service. So the SROs are still in the schools, but it's something that Edwards and some other school board members say it should have happened sooner. We should have gotten to it. We should have made sure that this was signed before it even expired so we wouldn't be in this position at all.
Right. Yeah, that's not something you want to overlook. And, I had SROs in my high school, so I have a pretty good understanding of what they do there. But in general, can you just give us kind of an overview of what an SRO's role is in a public school?
Absolutely. And I want to say I had an SRO too. His
Right.
name was Mr. Brian. He was my favorite. And so I feel like many of us had a really positive experience with an SRO. At least most people at my school did. So to give you kind of the definition of what an SRO is, I mean, it's pretty much what it sounds like, a school resource officer. So when you think of that definition, I mean, it's an officer that is trained to work in a public school. So these are people that are carefully selected. They're trained to be a law enforcement officer for school-based law enforcement and crisis response. So in a good program, SROs are providing a safe learning environment. They're providing resources to teachers, other staff members, and then they're also fostering positive relationships with children and youth. And I think that's a really important key point here because when we talk about SROs, we think of, your average police officer. They might not be someone who's going to approach a child, but when you put an officer in a school, these are people that really are catering to the youth. They want to create relationships with them. And something that's really important is that these school resource officers, they want to give students a good perspective of what it means to be a police officer and what it means to be conscious of public safety. So, whenever I had conversations and interactions with Mr. Bryan, I remember them being positive because he was really educating me, informing me, how to be a good citizen, how to be safe at school and elsewhere. And it's something that I look back on really, really fondly. So when you talk to a school resource officer, many of them will say it's one of the best jobs in the world. They get to make sure that youth understand what it means to be a police officer and, how to stay safe out in the community.
Right. And with that being said, I'm curious if you've spoken to any parents and how they're feeling about school safety in Nash County, and do those SROs give them any peace of mind being there?
Absolutely. Well, I think that school safety is front of mind for so many parents. And, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, especially after the school shooting in Georgia, I mean, this is something that happens really all the time now. So anytime we head back to school, I mean, as a news organization, we do so many reports on how are their mechanisms in place to make sure that students and teachers, really anyone that works in a school setting, can remain safe, especially amid this time when there are so many school shootings, unfortunately. And so, when I've talked to parents at the beginning of the school year, many of them have a lot of questions. I mean, what ways are school districts making sure that their kids are safe, and teachers as well, really, again, anyone within that setting. And, school resource officers are a big part of that. When I've had conversations with parents, they say we're so glad whenever we know that there is a full-time school resource officer in our school. And of course, not every school district has these, but we did reach out to quite a few school districts across our area today. And most of them do. I mean, even if they're not full-time, they have some sort of police presence on campus. But it is walking a fine line. I mean, you don't want it to seem like somewhere that's high security. I mean, for goodness gracious, it's a school. You want it to seem like a place that's conducive to learning. And if you have police officers all over campus, it might not feel like that. So overall, parents are really happy to see them there, to know that there's people around that can provide a quick response if needed in a crisis. And they're really just happy to know that most schools have them.
How do SROs and law enforcement in Nash County work together? Of course, we never want to get to that point in a life or death situation, but how do they work together if that were to occur?
So the SROs are really the first to respond to a school campus in a crisis. And I know this isn't a really fun topic to discuss, but it is important. And to have these SROs on campus, one of the biggest priorities is making sure that they are there if something does go wrong. And so they're coordinating with other law enforcement offices all across the community in that crisis. And they understand the layouts of the schools. They know where the teachers are. They understand what the school day looks like. So it allows them to really tackle those issues head on. And I think when we're having this conversation, something that we can bring up and that I actually recently was faced with is in Edgecombe County, another one of our rural communities, they do simulated school shootings. And again, it's not something that's fun for anyone to talk about, but in this world that we live in, you have to prepare for the worst. So I attended this simulated school shooting and kind of saw what they were planning for. And the SROs had a huge role in that because they're present on campus every single day. They can coordinate with outside law enforcement groups and show them, what the best areas are when responding to a crisis. And so especially watching that work hand in hand, law enforcement officials from off campus and on campus really responding to this crisis. I mean, it really shows how it could, at the end of the day, save a life.
Right, and better to be safe. And I do want to jump back to those SRO agreements. Are there any solutions in place to make sure that those aren't forgotten about or overlooked each year?
Well, our reporting just came out, and our hope is that by shining a light on this, there could be some solutions in the future. At this time, we're not sure that this is something that the school district is going to be tackling head on. We just have, comments from a few different school board members who say there has to be a solution. And so when I was speaking with Dean Edwards today, and reminder, he's a school board member in Nash County Public Schools, he said this year we didn't wait to renegotiate that agreement until, May or June. And remember, that agreement expired at the end of June. And so he said, we should really start at the beginning of the year. Let's get in there and take a look at the agreement, say in February, meet with law enforcement agencies, have these conversations well before the summer and when that agreement is expiring. And, I do want to remind people, nothing really bad happened here. I mean, in a way, this is best case scenario. They have such a good partnership within Nash County Public Schools with the Rocky Mount Police Department and the Nash County Sheriff's Office. And so, of course, they weren't going to let the SROs fall to the wayside. We all know it's important, but a really interesting point that Edwards brought up is, what if we didn't have that relationship? And if we didn't, that could mean an entire school district without SROs. And of course, we don't even want to think about that worst case scenario, because most people can agree that having a law enforcement professional that is trained with kids and ready to respond to a crisis is a good idea. So going forward, we're going to be asking the school district if they decide to take any steps to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And hopefully our reporting can spark that.
We'll be looking out for that. Heidi, thanks so much. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You can find us on WRAL.com, the WRAL News app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or really anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow the show so you don't miss an episode. We'll see you next time.